Welcome to Classic Gamer 74. I'm your host, Anthony Ventrilo, and today we're going to discuss wrestling video games from the 1980s. When Vincent Kennedy McMahon took over the Worldwide Wrestling Federation and renamed it the World Wrestling Federation, it brought wrestling into a whole new area that it had not experienced before and became a worldwide phenomenon, not just in the United States, but around the world. Hulk Hogan, who of course was the world champion at the time, became a cultural icon, and this was the time of rock and wrestling with the help of other celebrities like Cyndi Lauper and WrestleMania itself. Therefore, with it being as big and popular as it was, and we always say this on Classic Gamer 74, if anything was big in the 80s, it got made into a video game, and of course wrestling was perfect for the video game world. As big as the video games would become in the 1980s, WWF, or now known as WWE, didn't jump into the video game world as soon as other people did, such as Japan. Alright, now today's trivia question is, what was the name of the very first WWF endorsed video game? You think you know the answer? Wait till the end and see if you're right. The very first wrestling video game was called The Big Pro Wrestling, from 1983 by Technos Japan. In the United States, it was released as Tag Team. Let's check this game out. Okay, so in this game, you take on the role of Terry and Sonny, the good guys, or as you would in wrestling terminology, the faces, and you are going against the heel team. Now, the object is to win as many matches as possible. Now, of course, in this game, it's actually 10 matches that you have to fight against the heel team. And the way that the moves work is that you have two buttons at your disposal. You have the select button and then the action or pin button. Now, once you grapple with your opponent, you back away, and then it gives you a choice of which action move you would like to use. The amount of moves that you have at your disposal is very limited, but keep in mind this was 1980, and you could see right there that I'm picking the move. But of course this is the Japanese version of the game, so therefore I kind of have to guess what the moves are since I don't read Japanese. But again, you can play the American version of this game is simply called Tag Team, which was later ported out to the NES. Not a bad game for its time, but it really doesn't have the replayability that other early wrestling games have. Yet still, though, it's kind of neat to look back and see how wrestling games have evolved since this was the very first one. The next game is a very rare wrestling game that was released only in Japan called Apu. This game is pretty much virtually unknown outside of Japan, and it features many recognizable wrestling stars from Giant Baba's territory at that time. All right, here's the lineup of the wrestlers that are in Apu. You have, now again, you can tell who they are even though they make it pretty obvious that they're trying to cover it up, but don't let them fool you. You have Giant Baba, Hulk Hogan, Antonio Inoki, Stan the Lariat Hansen, Tiger Mask, Andre the Giant, Yuita, and Abdullah the Butcher. Now this game is so rare and obscure, I couldn't even find a cabinet of the game. But I was able to find the ROM, of course, so let's check it out and see what you think. Alright, so I am Abdullah the Butcher going against Antonio Inoki. Now, what I like best about this game is that the move sets for each wrestler are very realistic for that particular wrestler. You see that Abdullah the Butcher will actually stick a fork in the guy's head, so pretty violent, but yet a fun game, and you have 3 buttons instead of 2 to use, so more moves. In 1986 Epix which is the company that is most well known for the Olympic Games, like Winter Games, Summer Games, and California Games, created their own wrestling game that was released for only computers. This has to be my least favorite of all wrestling games. I found the moves to be very confusing and hard to do, and the match was unrealistically, fast-paced. But anyway, check it out and see what you think. Okay, you got those typical Apple computer sound effects that we all remember from the 80s. Not a big move set here, mostly a lot of punching and kicking, and that's about really it. And there you go, the match is over. Alright, so let's head back to Japan. In 1986, Sega created the game Dump Matsumoto, which was a tribute to the great Japanese female wrestler. So let's check this game out. Now, just like the big pro wrestling, this is a tag team game, but these ladies don't mess around. You got a pretty decent amount of moves and a move set, easy controls, very fluid, and it's just a really fun game. I had a blast playing it, so if you get a chance to check it out yourself, give it a try. It's called Dump Matsumoto from Sega from 1986. If you're an old school gamer like me and the previous game looked kind of familiar, well, it should, because it was the engine for the Pro Wrestling Mega cartridge for the Sega Master System. So let's check it out. Now, the action in this game is pretty fast-paced, but however, with only having 2 buttons, your move set is very limited, and you only have like 4 different teams to choose from, and you fight in a 10-match tournament, which can lead to a very long gameplay. Not my favorite, but certainly not my least favorite. I mean, I like the fact that this wrestler here gets to use the Boston Crab, but still doable for 1986 and for Sega Master System. Muscle was released in 1986 for the NES and was based on the Alien Wrestler toys that I, of course, collected back in those days. However, I can't show you footage from the game because I have not yet been able to find a ROM that is playable. Very simplistic, you have mostly a punching and kicking type game, but yet for its time, kind of fun. I would honestly have to say my favorite game from this time period has to be Pro Wrestling for the NES. It's modeled on my, of course, favorite wrestling game, Mat Mania, that I discussed in its own episode a little while back, except for that you actually get to choose your wrestler. You just don't have one assigned to you. The wrestlers are very typical of the good guys and bad guys from that time period, and it's totally replayable. So let me share it with you right now. Alright, I am taking on the role of Great Panther and moving my way up the VWA roster to get my shot at their champion, who is King Slender. I believe that's who it is. Anyway, of course, being as the NES only had 2 buttons, this game didn't have a large move set either. However, the moveset is unique for each wrestler. You got some great moves here that you can use. The action is pretty fast-paced. The controls are fluid. What you would have expected from the NES. And also, just for a little hint, if you find yourself having a hard time with your opponent, never underestimate giving them a pile driver on the concrete floor. It may just help you win the match. Not wanting to be left out, Atari made one last attempt at getting back into the video game market. Absolute Entertainment, which was started by former Activision founder Gary Kitchen, tried their hand at wrestling games with Title Match Pro Wrestling for the Atari 2600. Alright, so basically you had 4 different wrestlers to choose from. They are not unique at all other than their looks. They have the same very small moveset, which shouldn't surprise you as the Atari only had 1 button, so there wasn't going to be a lot of a lot going on here. Still, for its time, it was fun for like a minute or two until you discovered the NES games, but you know, you gotta give them credit for at least trying. They even tried to make a version for the Atari 7800, which was pretty much about the same. About the only main difference here between the 2600 and this version was that you had two buttons, and the graphics were a little bit fancier. Other than that, still not a really good game, but you know, like I said, this was Atari's last attempt and Absolute's attempt to stay significant in the video game market. Speaking of trying to stay significant, in 1987, Intellivision was still trying to hold on to what little foothold it had, and they created Body Slam Wrestling, so let's check that out. If you thought the other games were bad, you haven't seen anything yet. This was pretty bad. But like I said, you know, Intellivision was trying to hang on, and this was kind of their last-ditch effort to do so, which, as you can see, didn't work. Although the WWF's arcade games WrestleFest and WWF Superstars were very well received by fans and still hold up to this day, I mean, I did have episodes about both of them, their first entry into the world of the Nintendo Entertainment System weren't so great. Well, at the time, people thought they were great, but now, in recent years, people have kind of turned on LJN, so the first of these games is called WrestleMania. At the time, most of us liked the game because we really didn't know any better, so let's check it out and see what you think. Alright, now in this game you have the choice of just regular matches, one-on-one matches, or joining or having tournaments. The game is pretty much geared towards the fact that unless you're Hulk Hogan, you're probably not going to do that well. And you actually spend most of the time chasing your opponent around the ring. Like I said, at the time, we kind of liked it, the fans, you know, but we didn't really know that there was anything better, so yeah. Later that year, LJN released WrestleMania Challenge. This was a big improvement as you had more moves, you had different match types like tag team, Survivor Series, as well as tournaments. However, the biggest problem with this with this game, in my opinion, was the fact that, again, you spent a good deal of your time chasing your opponent around the ring, and it seems like it was kind of unfair in that your opponent's moves did a lot more damage to you than your moves did to them. But like I said, it was kind of cool for its time. I liked being able to play as the Ultimate Warrior and like Brutus Beefcake. This was, of course, years before the newer games, which you had Create a Wrestler. But yet, like I said, kind of cool for its time. Definitely a lot better than the regular WrestleMania game, that's for sure. In 1989, Taito released Champion Wrestler. This was not one of my favorite games. It was kind of similar to a fighting game more than a wrestling game. Like I said, not a bad game overall. It just really didn't hold my interest for some reason. I don't know why. The wrestlers were very colorful and kind of what you expected from that time period. However, there really wasn't much to help this game to stand out amongst the other wrestling games from that time period. Kind of has been forgotten a lot as it was never ported out to any game system. But I mean, there are games that are much worse, as you've seen, but yet still not one of my favorites by any stretch. And our final game today is Wrestle War that was released in 1989 by Sega, or Figure, as Sega at that time seemed to make the best wrestling games. Now this one is also pretty realistic, although not easy at all. This has to be one of the most difficult of all these games. Like I said, you know, you have some really tough opponents as you work your way up through the ranks. With the really cool name of Player One. Takes a lot of practice, a lot of probably you're going to spend a lot of quarters on this game trying to learn how to play it. But yet, it is worth it. It is fun and challenging. The controls are pretty fluid, and you're going to have a lot of fun playing this one. Plus, the wrestler you use has this really cool finish. He does a pile driver. It's a really cool move. So, like I said, yeah, Wrestle War by Sega. Really good game to end the 80s. Check it out if you can find it anywhere. Like I said, probably one of my favorites from on this list. And also, like I said, probably one of the most difficult, but yet one of the most fun. Alright, so back to our trivia question. What was the name of the very first WWF endorsed video game? And the answer is Micro League Wrestling. This game was released in 1987, and it was only released for the Amiga and Commodore 64, and later the Apple IIe and the PC. It was more of a strategy game than anything. If you'd like to see the game in action, head over to our Facebook page where you can see me and Red playing the game. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. Stay tuned, as later on we will have part 2 of wrestling video games from the 90s. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you have any suggestions for a particular video game or genre video games you'd like to see us review on our channel here, give us a suggestion in the comment section below, and who knows, maybe you'll see it on a later episode. Well, this has been Anthony Ventrilo, and thank you for stopping by, and I will see each and every one of you in the next episode. Until then, have a great day. Goodbye.